What's going on, buddy?
Oh, man. Just recovering. I've been on the road a lot more than usual. And that.
I know, man. We've both been busy over the last little bit. You've been busting up the road, though.
That's a young man's game. That's all I got on that.
It's tough.
I had a lot of fun, though. I went to my 49th state the other day.
I'm going to guess what your missing 50th is. It's really only what I'd consider to be one or two, because it seems like everybody that misses one state, it's one of the other two. And I'll have to explain one of them. Mm-hmm. It's either Alaska or Delaware.
Alaska it is.
Yeah.
Yep.
It seems like for some reason Delaware always gets the shaft. It's one of those kind of a weird state that's in this spot that you don't have to go through it to get to either like Philadelphia or New York,
That's true. Yeah. And I sometimes I think about, like, do people deliberately go around? Are they mad at Delaware or something? Because I went through there just because I want them to feel better and about themselves, and I'm gracious like that and thoughtful.
Yeah, I have been to neither Delaware nor Alaska.
I went to Maine. It rocked.
Maine's unbelievable, isn't it? Mid-coast Maine in particular.
And off the plane, we sat down right when we got to our destination. It was Boot Bay Harbor.
Yeah. We
sat down at this outdoor, harbor restaurant, and I got a lobster roll that I think it was like 2.5 lobsters sitting on top of this little hot dog bun.
Yeah.
It was incredible.
Love Maine. I bet the weather was just right, wasn't it?
Considering
this,
we're not having an Indian summer. We're having Indian summers here in Atlanta.
Yeah. Have we been clever enough so far? I mean, how many people have already been listening to this and had to hit the back button 7 times? Because in all previous shows, we always start with the with the theme song. They're
like, oh, wait, can you guys do that every time?
We hit the kids with the season 2 opener, the cold open, as they like to say on Saturday Night Live, right?
Yeah. No political.
No political humor here. Although you did culturally appropriate Indian summer there, didn't you?
Yeah, but that's not a political statement.
Outraged.
I didn't come up with it.
I am outraged.
Why? I'm thinking, like, if you really want to be honest about it, I think Indians loved Indian summer because that's brutal to be in the winter, like in a teepee, right? So I think I mentioned something that they embrace. They weren't offended.
I'm beginning to believe that this little cold open is an absolute stroke of genius now. I mean, this might be my favorite opening we've ever done.
Well, okay, if we're going to talk about political incorrectness, the other day, Shannon and Burke and I went downtown to go see a friend of ours play at this festival, music festival. And so we took Marta down because parking's always wacky. And we come up from Peachtree Center, which is right downtown.
Sure.
And we come out, and this guy walks by, and he goes, "Welcome to Atlanta, crackers." Man, we just started laughing. We just could not hold back. We were laughing our butt off. It was the funniest thing I've ever heard in my life.
It's also one of the most truthful things you've ever heard in your entire life as well.
Well, I've been there 22 years. I'm kind of pissed he didn't welcome me a long time ago, but maybe he had to warm up to me.
Yeah, the welcome wagon, better late than never, right?
It was so funny, man. That was the funniest thing I've experienced here.
So this wackadoo cold opening that I was throwing around in my mind, it was one of these things that without any further ado, we're going to listen to our brand new show opening that I put together a couple weeks ago. And when I was putting it together, I never let John know that this was going to happen. And I thought,
you never let me know anything.
Yeah, well,
that's cool.
Sometimes blissful ignorance has its, it has its benefits.
And you just like the fact that you never know what's going to fall out of my mouth if I'm not prepared.
Well, it's part of the charm of the show,
I guess.
I thought it would be kind of cool to just let everybody hear the new wacky opening, which is full of comedy and our favorite little drum sayings and things, And I thought it might be kind of nice to let John hear it at the exact same time that everyone else is getting ready to hear it. Or technically, you're hearing it before everyone else, because this show's going to be several days before it's published.
But I have not heard it.
Yeah, I haven't heard it. So here we go. Here is the all new for season 2 theme for the Drummers Weekly Groovecast.
I'll write it and we'll do it live.
The music I get, it starts my feet tapping and I get all happy inside.
You will not laugh. You will not cry. You will learn by the numbers. I will teach you.
Would you stop with the damn drumming?
You ain't got no problem, Jules. And wait for the wolf who should be coming directly.
You sending the wolf?
I'm just having a time, having a time.
I want all of you to enjoy your cake. So, enjoy.
Drums. I don't like the sound of those drums. An Indian hollered back, he ain't our regular drummer.
And there we go, folks.
Woo! All right, baby.
How many times are we going to mention Indians in the first 5 minutes of season 2's premiere?
Man, I love Indians. And right now, like, I went to the Braves game last night.
Yeah.
And they lost. And I'm like, I feel sorry, man. I'm like, Columbus Day, like,
I know.
Not probably the Indians' favorite time. Let's embrace our Native American friends and lift them up.
And I think I mentioned to you a couple weeks ago, my sleeper pick, which is already gone though, to win the World Series was the Cleveland Indians. I hate to pick against Terry Francona, man. That guy's he's an absolute gangster.
He's almost as good as Joe Madden. Oh wait.
Well, we know what happened
the
there
most
too.
Glorious 3 days of my year.
So, John, what's your initial impressions of season 2's intro theme?
I thought it was great. I probably missed half of it, but
what do you mean by that?
The half I heard, I liked. I don't have the attention span to listen that long.
Well, I thought I made it snappy enough for a little 40 seconds in and out.
Look, it was what I remember was fantastic.
I took a few great drumming clips and threw it in there. Mm-hmm. And did any of them come to mind as far as like, oh, I know who that was, or I know who that was? Or...
There were a couple that were familiar, but I'd have to hear them again, and I could probably get them.
Well, see, that's our next contest. Have the listeners end up getting back to us and let us know who's what, where, and all that other stuff. But the only thing I will give away is our outro, because the one thing I thought that was really cool, because we had so much fun with Philly Joe on our 2 years of that same intro that never changed,
right?
Is I thought it's kind of fun, man, to put some burning fours at the end. Any idea who our new drummer is there at the end of that?
Neil Peart. You gonna put me on the spot like this, man?
Well,
I'm thinking back to the licks. That's about the only thing I'm retaining right now. Sound too.
It's definitely very traditional, right?
Yeah.
But you can tell it's a modern recording.
Sure.
Right. Well, I will. If you don't want to, I guess I'll go ahead and tell you who it is.
Okay. Marvin Smith.
Oh, but you're in the ballpark, man. You are absolutely in the ballpark. Same vintage of drummer, that is the jazz maniac.
Oh,
Kenny Washington.
Kenny. I should have known. You're such a Kenny fan.
Oh, I love Kenny Washington, man.
Yeah.
He's such an unbelievably good player that he's one of those guys, man, that you can ask him anything and he will give you 15 correct answers on why it should be that way.
I love it.
Yeah.
I was in the, like you said, I was in the ballpark, so I didn't embarrass myself thoroughly.
No, you did good. That's very good.
Why, that's Jimmy Chamberlain from the Smashing Pumpkins. You didn't know he played jazz in high school, did you?
You could have thrown out the drummer for Odin that we were talking about prior to the show.
I'm pretty sure he didn't swing.
Here we are. We're back. Season 2. A lot of people said it couldn't be done. It's done. We're back. And I want to go ahead and say also, thanks to many people who sent emails and sent social media messages about, hey, when are you guys coming back? Love to have you guys back again. We miss having it. It was really cool, man. And we heard from several people that we just don't know. Of course, we heard from a lot of what we call our power listeners, that were a little upset when we took our hiatus. And I think some people were really afraid that we were not going to come back, that we were just saying, hey, this is, we're just going to take a break. And then all of a sudden we don't ever come back. But no, we're back. Again, thanks for your patience. And we got some really nice surprises coming up, of which John's completely and totally unaware of, because I haven't even told him. But by the way, we would need to have a discussion after we're done today.
Okay.
Yeah.
Thank you.
Yeah, absolutely. So I thought what we would do today is we would kind of catch everybody up to what we've been doing, what we've been up to, and then also we've got a pretty cool topic today that we're going to talk about, and we'll finish off with one of our customary segments at the end of the show. The break, quite honestly, John, was, I thought, incredibly helpful.
Oh yeah, I agree. 2 straight years. Yeah,
2 straight years, never missing a week. And so it was very healthy. And, during that amount of time, certainly had some time to rest. But, God, doesn't it, I swear to you, it seems like when you end up having time off, or when you think the perceived time off is, that's when other stuff comes into play, and it makes you just as busy during that time.
Yes.
Because I talked to you several times, and I was like, man, during this time, I think what needs to happen is we should actually start banking up a bunch of shows so that we can actually have time off later, right? And that didn't happen because a whole bunch of other things ended up happening. You were on the road. I ended up during that time off that I had, August was not that busy. It was moderately busy. It was moderately. I subbed for you a few times during that time. But I ended up doing some writing and recording. And another thing I haven't told you, I actually have gotten back into the in-home session business a little bit again.
Nice.
So we can talk about that a little bit later as well.
I bet your therapist is ecstatic.
Absolutely. Couldn't be happier. On a completely separate note, I want to say one thing because it's fresh on my mind as well. I've done a little bit of gear experimentation, and I'm going to throw this out there and let everyone talk amongst themselves. It's no secret that you and I and a host of our listeners are absolute Gretschaholics. We love Gretsch drums. It's just fantastic. Well, I've done a series of gigs, or a few gigs, I won't say a series of gigs, where I've had to use some backline. And the backline has come in numerous different amalgamations. All companies we're all well aware of. Pearl and Yamaha and blah, 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 right? And Sonar too. And for a while now, I've been playing on a lot of my live gigs. I've been playing this infamous Gretsch Renown kit, which you've actually borrowed and you used for a while.
I did.
It's a plenty fine kit.
Oh, yeah.
It's a plenty fine kit, right? I, over the last 2 weeks, have broken down that natural maple Gretsch kit that some of y'all have seen in some videos that I've posted and stuff, and have taken it out. Man, I'm not going to slight all the other kits, and I'm not going to slight the Renown, but man, it is night and day.
I am not shocked in the least.
I'm sitting here preaching to the choir to a lot of people, but that Gretsch USA Custom, I mean, that's all I'm going to say. What have you been up to, man, during our little hiatus?
I've been on the road a lot.
That's why I was subbing for you.
Yep. And it's been good. I'm at the point in my life where I would prefer to not be on the road a lot.
Yeah.
But this was just a few months, and and it's not a big deal, but it's really healthy, like something fresh and different, and going out and the old spending time in a van with people, or flying with people. You got to you forget you got to kind of be diplomatic and all that stuff. So that's been cool. Played some fun shows and fun venues. And other than that, been trying to sell some stuff. Hanging with my boy.
Yeah.
He's back in school now, but
I think you and I fall into the trappings of travel, that we like to travel in the way that we're accustomed to being treated. We like to be fancy men whenever we travel, and whenever we have to climb into the van, it's the gnashing of teeth.
It's definitely a challenge. I will say this: the gig where I'm putting more time in driving in personal vehicles is one I really like and I really enjoy, and that makes it a little easier than, you know, our typical corporate gig. Man, yeah, I want to be treated.
Yeah, makes it a whole lot easier when you got good people that you like and you like the music that you're playing.
So, you know, the nature of the other gig I'm doing, there's some perks to it by way of venues and, you know, the integrity of the gig and all that. Not that every gig I do doesn't have integrity. They all do, by all means, and I don't want to slight, but yeah, I'm a little more into that right now, and I like it. So it makes the traveling a little easier. And, of course, I did a run up in the New York area and had planned on driving, but then I had a magic little nice paying gig fall in my lap the night before we were to leave.
Mm-hmm.
And I just had to buy a one-way flight.
Well, that little magic good paying gig paid for your comfort.
It did. Yeah. And I still came out okay. So, you know, man, that's cool. Sometimes you can justify spending a little money to make your life a little easier.
In particular, I think if you can get yourself to the start of a run of out-of-town gigs in a comfortable fashion,
it's a good
thing. And likewise, also sometimes if you can get yourself home in a comfortable fashion, if it allows, especially if, you know, sometimes when you do a run, you get into a place where you start, you know, further away from home and end closer to home, and it's not as bad driving back. Sometimes it's the opposite way. You know, you might end up 2,500 miles away from home. And so sometimes flying back when you finish is a nice way to kind of treat yourself for a job well done.
True.
So understood.
If I could fly to Nashville, I would. I don't know what you're talking about.
Flying to Macon tomorrow for a gig.
Because it's comfortable.
Well, you could get into that whole thing. Hey, there's a few comedians that I listen to on podcasts that have gotten into this thing where they've taught themselves to be helicopter pilots. And what they'll do is fly themselves to these regional gigs that are arguably too far to drive comfortably, but may not be
flight worthy.
Mm-hmm. And so they're renting a helicopter and flying themselves to a helipad and doing a comedian's gig.
I'm not going to do that.
It's cost prohibitive too, man. On top of that,
you do, you know well. I get to travel pretty comfortably when I travel, and so if I'm going to put in some time in a little less comfortable setting, it's got to be something I like doing, and I'm doing. That is the case, so that's cool.
And even if you throw out the entire factor that it would cost a lot for fuel and renting a helicopter, the other underlying thing that I know you're thinking about is like, I don't want to have to schlep my gear at least. It would be 4 times on a gig. You got to drive it to the airport, get it out of the car, put it in the helicopter, get to the next place, take it out of a helicopter, put it in a car, drive it. You're
so far ahead of me. Like, I don't want to put any more weight in the helicopter. I'm still there. Like, no, that drum set will be my demise because it weighs 194 pounds. Yeah.
Well, see, you could get to the whole thing. You get to the point if you're flying a helicopter to a gig, it's a backline only gig. How's that?
There you go.
At least I've set
you
up for that.
I'm not crazy about helicopters.
I'm not either, man. Those things don't want to leave the ground, and I'm not happy about being in anything that doesn't want to leave the ground.
Thank you.
You know what I mean? It feels like everything that you do in one of those, it feels forced.
Yep.
When you're on one of those nice, comfy jets, they just want to take off.
They're happy.
Yeah, they're happy. They're happy
like
to
the
be
popular girl.
Yeah,
That's why
that's why I don't understand the whole thing of like skydiving. I mean, you're in a perfectly good plane.
Yeah,
it's time to move on. Huh?
Yeah, we don't need to get into idiots. I mean daredevils.
So, our topic for today is something that I sort of feel like that we're going to be able to bring our experience to this, because the majority of the time I feel that this is the trappings of a young man here, a young man's game. This is a lot of time happens to the inexperienced. Now, I'm not saying that it can't happen to people that have done it hundreds of times or been doing it for 20 or so years, but my experience with this was when I was a younger buck, and I'm calling it performance panic. Call it whatever you want, performance neurosis, but one thing that separates it from a couple of different topics that we've talked about in the past is that this type of thing is brought on by yourself, by your own mind. It's a self-inflicted wound, so to speak. It's not a stage bully where somebody's coming down on you. It's something where you get inside your own mind. I feel sure that everybody has probably experienced this in the past. There's a couple of surefire ways to get out of it. And I thought what we would do, John, is we would maybe talk a little bit about some of our past experiences, what actually happened when we experienced this type of panic, what brought it on, so to speak, and then how you get past it. So we'll go ahead and jump into this.
Let's go.
You want me to go first?
Sure.
Want to go first? Okay. Well, the first time that I really remember this happening, and I can, it's so vivid in my mind that I can like remember the people in the room and the lighting in the room and what it smelled like and the whole thing. And what I'm going to call this type of panic is the absolute utter folding. I mean, shutting down to the point of like, can't think about anything else. Mind is racing. And what happened to me, I was probably about 19 years old or so. And I had been playing for a while. I was in music school. And I had been in school for a couple of years. And I was taking part of a series of ensemble performances this night. You know, it was one of those things where several different ensembles will perform. And I was in one of the higher ensembles. I was in this ensemble, the Horace Silver group, which essentially was playing a bunch of Horace Silver tunes, right?
Really?
Yeah, that's what it was. And it was a good group, and a lot of people were there, you know, in the room. And, you know, we were set up and we were playing along, and it was one of those things where everything was going fine. And then you look out across the audience and you start seeing different people that are there that you always want to play well, but then I think the thing that goes in your mind, I want to impress these people. Saw one of my teachers, my main teacher that was out there, that I really wanted to play well for this guy. Saw other friends out there that you want to impress as well. Saw a girl out there that I wanted to impress. And then, sure enough, you get into your own head and things are they just don't end up working right. Things that you've done 1,000 times, it just starts falling apart. And the place where the wheels came off, so to speak, was I was in the middle of a solo. And when you don't have ideas, when you don't have real musical ideas that are coming to you other than, hey, I just want to do something that's good and want to impress people, I'm just going to start playing things. What ended up happening was, of course, I outsmarted myself and wanted to be too cool for what was going on. And I was in the middle of this section that I was playing, and I really had brought these dynamics down, and I was playing this what I thought was this artfully clever, minimalistic type thing, and it was dead silent in the room. And of course, I was panicking also because it wasn't coming out the way that I wanted to. And I dropped a stick in this quiet part of this solo that I was doing that hit a tile stage that the dropping of the stick was louder than what I was playing. And I got cold. I mean, douche-chillingly cold. And just, if I wasn't in panic prior to then, I went into total panic at that time. And I looked out at that time and saw my teacher sitting out there. And I could tell that he could tell that I was panicking. Man, I will never forget that. I was only probably halfway in the middle of this set that we were doing as well. Probably had a good solid 15, 20 minutes of playing left. And it was absolute misery. I couldn't play basically anything else after that. But I learned from it, John.
What tell me what you learned, because that's every gig I do. I need your help.
Well, when I got finished with that, I was mortified. I was taking myself way too seriously at that time.
Right.
And that's where the genesis of this panic was generating up. And this teacher, after the thing was over, he just came up to me and he was like, you've got to have more fun when you're up there playing. He goes, what you're playing is not the end of the world. You're way too serious about this stuff. I know you want to do well, but you're getting in your own way. What a major lesson that was, because prior to that, thinking in terms of playing, not only playing jazz, which I was relatively new to at that time, but also playing in kind of a clinical, collegiate sort of setting, it got into my head, maybe even subconsciously, not thinking of it, because it certainly wasn't some rock and roll party atmosphere.
Maybe
right?
Prior to that particular moment too.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And so it was one of those things that it was like, man, this is my entire life encapsulated at this moment that I have to make it all come to fruition. And I just took it way, way too seriously. And when that kind of thing happens and then you start seeing these other people out in front of you, it then becomes an all-consuming thing that this is the hill I'm going to die on. We're at fight or flight, and then there's no fun. There's no spontaneity in that. And so I really learned from that moment that no matter what you're doing, you can't make this thing, this is not going to be the end of your life. You got to have some fun when you're doing it. And be in the moment. Listen to what's going on around you. And you can't force anything. And when you overthink and start forcing stuff, then you get too clever and you drop a stick during a triple pianissimo, overly clever solo moment and look like a chump.
Yuck. And I will say this. Mm-hmm. Your teacher's advice, that was probably the best lesson you had all semester and worth every penny that you paid for that semester.
Yeah. And
incredible, like, what are you doing? It's not the end of the world here.
It's not the end of the world. And
right.
And to borrow a term that you coined, 50 episodes ago, there are times where it's absolutely appropriate. If you're not hearing anything, don't force anything. Dig a trench.
Mm-hmm.
I mean, that's absolutely sage words right there. Dig a trench. Play good time. Nobody's going to come down on you for that.
No way. No, that's celebrated far more in our musical settings. The majority of the time, people are happier digging a trench and not going off the rails and playing a bunch of crap. So as you stated,
yeah,
that will always be celebrated.
Well, the other thing I think that sometimes gets lost whenever you start feeling that sort of isolation or that spotlight syndrome type thing is that you feel like that everybody out there is focusing solely on you. And that's certainly not the case by any stretch of the means. Half the time, people are not even paying any attention to you, right? Until you do screw up in something like that.
Especially in that setting, like it's either I could do it better or
right.
Where are we going to get cheap beer?
Exactly. And for the most part, a lot of the people that you're wanting to impress, like these teachers that are sitting out there, they want you to do well.
Yeah.
They want you to do
it.
Well.
Reflects on them for sure.
It absolutely does. So it's that weird faulty psychological thinking that you throw yourself in the ditch. So just keep those things in mind and just be in the moment. Listen to what's going on. If nothing's coming to you, don't force it. Dig a trench. Everybody wants you to do well. If it doesn't happen that time, there's going to be another gig the next night or a couple days down the road. So that's my first situation.
Yeah. All of us lifers have survived more gigs than we care to admit, that we walk away feeling like it was a complete disaster, and 90% of the time nobody noticed except our brain and our insecurities.
Yeah.
It is what it is. You know, you got to figure out how to work through it. It's funny. I'm thinking of a situation where I did a gig that was kind of off the rails, and it had nothing to do with my abilities or my trying to impress someone. It had to do with the fact that I was late for the gig. And you know me well enough to know that I'm probably more obsessed with that than playing.
Well, it's something in particular that you have absolute control over.
True. Very true. I was about the same age, and my high school band director had a big band. It was like read down once a month at this nice restaurant bar. And it was all like, 3 of my teachers I grew up with, and, the better players from that area came in and played it down, and me. But he asked me to do the gig, and I didn't have a car at the time. I relied on someone else. And 20 minutes out, I realized I'm going to be late, and I'm freaking out. I walk into this place with drums, mind you, 3 trips. They're already playing a big band.
No drums.
With me. And I have to set up in front of everybody. This whole restaurant's where, there's not a bad seat in the house to see where the band is and all that, and just sheer misery. And man, like 4 or 5 songs, my head is completely out of the game. I'm falling apart. And the silver lining is I learned a great deal on the gig.
Yeah.
Is some tune was called that I knew inside and out, right in my wheelhouse, everything about it. I'd played it 30 times, and halfway through that tune, I was able to collect myself, and the gift of him calling that tune, and it may have been on purpose. Like,
I would bet
this dude
it is.
Just like, I know he slays this tune. Here we go. And I was able to climb out of that hellhole throughout that 4 minutes and kind of collect myself. And what I learned, the takeaway from that was, not unlike the digging a trench mindset you said you could have gotten in and survived. It was the same kind of thing, like play to your strengths, relax, do what you do, find something that's going to get your head in a place where you can at least get through this. So early on, I learned that, look, man, things can go south. Just the other night, I had this thing where, like, I always put, like, tempos in order on my metronome, and something went south, and it took me, like, 2 songs to kind of collect myself. That's pitiful. But it was so miserably hot.
Yeah.
I was tired. We drove, 10 hours or whatever, and it's just not on my game. It's going to happen, but you find something that you can collect yourself in, and then you're going to be okay. But that was one that could have been disastrous, and by the grace of God, he called a tune.
Yeah, yeah.
So find that place in that gig. Find that place in your playing or in your head that you're not going to let this completely continue to derail.
Right. And just before we started the show, this is also going to be my next example. I was talking about a story when I was in Memphis where it's a completely different type of derailing, which it doesn't necessarily come from the panic of I'm not doing something well. It's the exact opposite. And so, again, when you start talking about the trappings of youth, the young mind goes in different ways and interprets things in different fashions. And when I learned from that,
oftentimes the polar opposite of the two experiences we had just relayed.
I like to tell students now, don't overcorrect is what it is. And that's what I did on this second example.
Remind yourself on occasion you're not that awesome.
Yeah. And when I left undergraduate school and went to graduate school, I had this unintended benefit of going to this school or going to this city where there's a lot of fantastic jazz musicians that originated out of Memphis. And not only did they originate out of Memphis, but they used to frequent Memphis quite often. They'd come back for one thing or another. And what would end up happening is a lot of times to make some extra money, they'd end up booking a gig there. And if they didn't bring somebody there, they would end up hiring somebody locally. And a lot of times I ended up playing with those guys one way or another. And part of the way I got to play with them also was from the time I was at UT. One of the professors there was a piano player from Memphis, a guy named Donald Brown, and I think he probably recommended me a few times to some of his friends that were coming back through to play. And so part two of my, we'll call it performance neurosis this time, was I got hired to do a gig with Mulgrew Miller. And Mulgrew Miller came in and we ended up playing, doing kind of like I'd call it maybe like a public rehearsal prior to the gig over at Memphis. And it was one of those things where we were playing in a room over there, but people could come by and check it out. And everybody wanted to see Mulgrew Miller, wanted to see what was going on, right? And so we were in this rehearsal. And of course, the main thing that was going through my mind was, don't let happen what happened in the first story. Don't freeze and panic. And I'm like, man, I'm going to be myself and I am going to play. And of course, what ends up happening is I played a little too much. And and let me say that Mulgrew didn't say a word. But when we were taking a break, one of my friends who was a graduate assistant along with me over at the University of Memphis, just very succinctly, he had been sitting there watching it, came up to me and he just goes, "You know he plays with Tony Williams, right?" And so I just went, "Oh, okay. I might have been a little over the top. I might have played a tad too much on that." And so I just want to wrap this story up then by basically saying the takeaway on this is when you're playing with somebody that's that great and that has played with arguably the greatest drummer in history, there's nothing you're going to be able to do that A, he hasn't heard before, or B, it's just passe because he's playing with the greatest drummer in the history of music. So when you're in a situation like that, don't all of a sudden overcorrect and then go, look, I'm not going to fold because I'm going to play everything that I know. So that's a form of like a overcompensation is essentially what it is. Another quick takeaway on that is when you play with somebody that is that good, almost anything you can play, especially from the simplistic standpoint, they make you sound good. They make you sound like $1,000,000. Man, I got a chance to play when I was over there with James Williams, Mulgrew Miller, of course, Donald Brown. In that rhythm section, when you play with those guys, there's nothing you can do to sound bad except completely and totally go over the top. Mm-hmm. Because when you go over the top and you're not accustomed, because I wasn't accustomed to doing that. Also, that's the other subplot to this. And the other thing that this guy noticed when he goes, this guy plays with Tony Williams. What are you doing? is that when you get out of character and you're trying to overplay and impress somebody like that, couple things for sure it's going to happen. In fact, the only things that's guaranteed to happen is you play that much, man, you're going to end up being sloppy from time to time. Secondly, your time is going to be affected when you're not accustomed to doing that. So the moral of this story is don't try to impress these people. Let what they're playing come to you. Just play simply. You're going to be fine on that. Be yourself. You're not going to impress one of these guys that's been playing with one of the greatest legends in the history of music. Let them make you sound great.
That's gold.
They don't want to make you nervous either.
No.
They don't want to make... They've been in that position before.
I think sometimes, too, especially younger, inexperienced guys, man, like, oh, jazz. It's got to be busy and interactive.
Right. Yeah.
And then, Mulgrew Miller is probably like, just play time, man. I can play this, I just want to make some music.
Yeah.
He can't tell Tony to not play busy.
Right.
But he could hope you might not. So, there you have it. I used to get hired by a couple freaks in St. Louis, and I never could figure out why they'd hire me. Most of these gigs were like paid pretty well because we were like wallpaper music.
Yeah.
That's why they hired me. I didn't do anything but play time. They could play freaky all over the top of it, but to the people out there having some wine and cheese, it just sounded kind of like Kind of Blue or something, 'cause
right.
I'm not back there blazing away playing, some heady, insane technical stuff. It was just like I was the mask, I guess you could say.
Well, you were staying home,
right.
That's what it was.
Making it appear we're doing what we were asked to do, and these guys could just blow over the top. But because there was this foundation of simplicity, the people who hired us are getting what they think they wanted. So what have you. I think sometimes we work ourselves up when we're getting ready to play with somebody. Like, oh, they're probably getting them. Man, I hope they don't vibe me. All that. Typically, the better players don't.
No.
But you are going to run across that. And, man, you talk about stuff that can get in your head. Like you've got to work past these. I deal with it to this day on occasion where someone who ultimately is just not happy and is bringing that to the gig, but you let either their stature or their personality or their ability dictate your worth.
Right. The only time that I've experienced that with that super heavy hitter, and I'll go ahead and say his name because he's passed away, and I'll give you a kind of a coda to this story also, was I had a chance to play with Eddie Harris one time, and man, he was tough on everybody, man. He came down on everybody. And to tell you the coda that I want to put on this when I say that he came down on everybody, as part of this festival, that it was a jazz week thing that was happening. The other group that was there was Schofield's group. And I got a chance to play a little bit with Schofield in a big band setting, but Schofield also had his band there. And in his band was a bunch of lightweights named Dennis Irwin, Joe Lovano, and Bill Stewart. And Eddie Harris actually...
Like local guys.
Yeah. Eddie Harris actually sat in with them, and I got to see them rehearse, and he actually came down on them.
Woo.
In some of the rehearsals about, I feel like this is slowing down here. You're late on one. He was
kind of like a control freak, maybe.
Well, I think he kind of also came into that setting also being the elder statesman of that bunch, because keep in mind this was 25 years ago.
Yeah, that's true.
As well. And so, John Schofield at that time was maybe not the elder statesman that we think of at this time. Schofield had really sort of reinvented himself into playing straight ahead. Mm-hmm. Now, he had played straight ahead prior to that, but most people at that time knew Schofield from like 1980 up until 1990 of being a fusion guy, right? With like Omar Hakim on drums, Steve Jordan on drums, Dennis Chambers on drums. And then somewhere like around 1990, 1991, he kind of jettisoned that and went into the more the straight ahead realm.
Right.
And this would have been around 91 or 92 when all this happened. So yeah, Eddie Harris, he pretty much held everybody's feet to the fire on that. But he wasn't necessarily mean about it or anything. He really knew what he wanted, and he kind of felt that it was his position to steer everybody in that direction.
Here's what we're going to do. Yeah. I can respect that. Sometimes it's just a delivery.
Yeah, his delivery was sort of short.
Yeah, and that can be misinterpreted easily.
Yeah.
When you're talking about creatives and the situation and the legend that he is,
right?
You're immediately thinking like, oh, he's just vibing me, he's pissing me off. You know, he's just grouchy and doesn't know how to communicate, and he just wants to dictate. That's where your brain can go.
Sure.
Some people are just short.
You know, I just thought of something that I want to bring up before I bring up this last little story is that when I was over in Memphis, also, I had an opportunity to hang out with Jeff Watts for a couple of days. He came through with Branford's quartet, and the forward-thinking people over at the school at that time thought, hey, you know, it might be a good idea to have some of these guys come in and do some clinics. So that Jeff Watts agreed to do it. So I went and picked him up at the airport and brought him over to the school, and he did a clinic. And he played great, of course, did his clinic for about an hour and a half. And when he was wrapping up, one of the teachers said, hey, Jeff, why don't you give everybody a little bit of advice, right? You know, give all these students some advice on what to do. Mm-hmm. And he, at that time, 1991, 92, he was sort of reinventing himself as well. He was starting to dig a trench a tad bit more at that time, getting a little bit further away from that Wynton Marsalis overly complex polyrhythmic stuff that they were known for from the, you know, early to mid 80s up until, you know, like around 1990 or so.
Right.
And he said, if I could tell you guys something, is this. I met Dizzy Gillespie, he said, maybe like 6 or 7 years ago, and ended up playing with him on a gig or two, and started doing all kinds of my polyrhythmic stuff, and I was overplaying a little bit and doing some stuff, and he was like, man, he said I wore it as a badge of honor that I got Dizzy Gillespie lost, man. I got Dizzy Gillespie lost when I was doing my polyrhythmic stuff and my soloing stuff. And he then said, I wore it as a badge of honor for a little while, that he was able to take a legend and get this guy turned around. And then he said, upon further inspection of that, I realized how completely faulty my thinking was on that. That sitting there and thinking about getting a legend, a guy like that turned around and lost, doesn't mean, you know, that you're just this ultimate badass. You know, you're
reveling in it. It means you're kind of the opposite.
Right. And so he said, I knew at that time I had to sit back and take stock of what I was actually doing this for. You know, not one of these things that I'm so advanced and I've taken this art form that this guy helped create, and I'm going to show him that I've taken it way past anything that he could have ever dreamt of. And so it kind of relates back to the second story of like, look, sure, you might be able to play a whole bunch of crazy stuff, but Dizzy Gillespie, man, has there been anybody he hadn't played with? And then here you are trying to impress him by, you know, taking something to the nth degree and getting him lost. Mm. But I thought that was a really very cool story that he related.
You know, I wonder too, like, Dizzy seems like a person to me that, and there's plenty of guys that kind of have a different attitude, but his whole thing was jazz should be forward thinking. It should grow. We should push. Not we should have an ego and try to bury each other.
Yeah, force each other into a corner, you know, man.
Even in a cutting situation, I always thought like Dizzy's one of those guys that like, man, I want to lift this guy up. If he's playing amazing stuff, challenging me, I want to try to rise to that challenge and then challenge him. Not like I want to embarrass this cat.
Right.
You know, and that's an interesting, and man, it takes a humble, intelligent, you know, deep musician to be in that mindset and then work yourself out of it.
Yeah.
Pretty cool. Because there's plenty of people who stay in that.
Right.
I want to bury you.
Yeah, yeah. From what I would call a toxically competitive mindset.
I mean, just go play sports or something.
Yeah.
You know, music should be collaborative.
Yeah, yeah. The last thing I want to say also comes almost as another overcorrection or overreaction to my second story. And it took place less than a year, less than a year after the Mulgrew Miller thing. Memphis had this thing at one time. They used to call it the homecoming. And what it was is it was a loose thing. It wasn't an organized thing, but they used to call it a homecoming. And what it was the Sunday after Christmas, the jazz club in town was this place called the North End. And traditionally, the guys that were in New York or LA or whatever would come home for the holidays. If they were still in town, they would come by the North End. They'd bring their horns, whatever, come and sit in. And it was the people that you thought that would come through. It was the Donald Brown, James Williams, Mulgrew Miller, George Coleman, Bill Mobley. It was who you would think, right, that would come in. Well, I got the call to do that gig that year because the guy that traditionally did it, Doug Garrison, was out of town at that time. So I got the call to do it. So when I went in to that gig, and by the way, just as a side note, somebody actually posted a picture on Facebook a few months ago of me at that gig. This gig that I'm talking about. Somebody posted a picture of me at this gig, and dude, check out who was in the rhythm section. Rodney Jordan was playing bass, right?
Yep.
Playing piano is George Coleman.
No kidding.
Yeah.
That's cool.
And I can tell you the setting on this as well. He was playing piano after he had taken about 25 choruses on tenor, right? And so he was sitting down playing piano, and he soloed on piano equally as well as he did on tenor, right? So everybody can look and find that on Facebook somewhere. They can find this. It's probably I would say it's late December of 92-ish, somewhere in there, that time. So I went into that gig with the mindset of dig a trench. Dig a trench. I know George Coleman's going to be here. I know James Williams is going to be here.
Yeah.
Well,
it's a good start.
It's a good start. But once again, I overcorrected. And essentially what ended up happening is I got into the point of playing, as we say in sports, you're playing not to lose instead of playing to win. And again, in so many ways, that's another forced response. Mm-hmm. You're sort of self-censoring yourself.
Disaster looms either in either approach.
Well, let me tell you where the disaster comes from on this. Where the disaster comes from on this is then at that time, if you're going to self-censor yourself from the standpoint of then I'm going to play super simplistically all the way through. And everything in my head at that time was play super simple, play the things that you've played thousands of times and just concentrate on time. But I went so far into it that all I could think of was time. When you get into that, then what happens? Things you've played thousands of times, you've overthought it, straight downhill, man. It maybe wasn't as bad as the other two times, but I got to the point of into my head, overthinking things that I've played thousands of times instead of, again, just relaxing and having fun. And you and I even had a conversation a couple of months ago where we were talking about playing like a fast 2-beat kind of a thing, that kind of a deal. And it's something you can do walking backward. But if you have to do it for a long period of time, if you have to do it for 8-10 minutes in a row, you sit there, and if you're not being present, you get into your head, what could go wrong? I'm just playing this beat that I learned the first time I ever sat down behind a set of drums. I've played it conservatively 10,000 times. What could go wrong? And then immediately your hands don't work. And
your leg is the way you're sitting, the height you're at, the angle of the snare drum, all of these things you start thinking about, like
everything. Ugh. And then it just goes downhill from there. And so again,
this is another reason why we should just play recorded, Horace. Everybody's going to be happier.
You can loop it too.
That's it, man. It's all about them dancing to their heart's content, right?
Yeah.
They don't care that he played that 2-beat perfect for 11 minutes and 34 seconds.
Yeah, I'll just finish off by saying is here are all these guys that came into town just wanting to have fun. Everybody's wanting to hang out, meet up with each other again. Mm-hmm. Just be home for a little while, have some fun playing. And once again, I got into my own head, had the spotlight on me, thinking that I've got to play this thing exactly right, play some time, get into my head. George Coleman's going to hire me. This kind of thing. It's just so delusional.
Did you end up doing any more homecomings?
I moved, man, after that.
That's probably.
Yeah.
Well, at least you didn't get that in your head.
Well, and legend, here's the other thing, and of course this is not true either, but legend would have it that was like the be-all, end-all of the homecoming, that everybody that was supposed to show up showed up to that one. You know what I mean? Like, oh, it's never happened again. Because, I mean, and I suppose in some ways that has to be somewhat true because James got really sick, after that. Mm-hmm. And he died a few years later, so naturally it didn't happen, and then, Mulgrews no longer with us anymore. And George is way up there in years and whatnot. But anyway, that was my last story on that. So folks, that's all we wanted to talk about regarding that topic today is just, not everything that happens on stage is being thrust upon you by someone else. A lot of times it's in your own head. And I think virtually everyone has had something like this happen to them before. And if you can get out of your own head, relax a little bit, remember it's not the end of the world. Everything's going to be fine. These guys, these famous, wonderful, world-class players want you to do well. And everything will take care of itself. Simple as that.
Amen.
So, John, let's finish off today with one of our customary segments. I thought for a little while about maybe jettisoning this whole thing of segments and let's just do a show and make it clean and get out of here. And I ran it by a couple of people. And I said, I think, we're making some changes in, this new season that's coming around. And every single person that I talked to, before I even said something about not doing a segment, they said, you're keeping the segments at the end of the show, right? You're keeping the drummers and the garage and all that other stuff. And I was like, yeah, we're going to keep those. So we're going to keep them. People like hearing what we have to say about this stuff.
I got to earn my money somehow.
Somehow. You want to go first?
No.
No? Go first.
I'm not going first.
All right, I'll go first. I came across relatively recently a wonderful, wonderful cymbal that I had heard a few of these in the past, and every time I heard one, it was really good cymbal. But I thought that I was just getting lucky. I thought, oh, this is just a magic cymbal, man. This is a magic one. And then, there's so many of these different sites now that have the, listen before you buy cymbal. And you go through and you listen to them. It's like, wow, well, that one sounds good too. And that one sounds good. And that one sounds good. And then, like the psychopaths that we are when it comes to cymbals, we start analyzing and we look at it and we go, well, what makes it sound good? And then you eventually start narrowing down like gram weights and stuff. And, oh, well, these really seem to be good that are in this gram weight. And so the cymbal that I'm talking about is an Istanbul Agop 30th anniversary 22-inch cymbal, 22-inch ride. And to me, for my taste, the magic weights are between like 2250 and 2300, maybe 22, 23, 25, somewhere in that 50 to 75 gram weight. And before all you guys go, well, it's 50 to 75 grams, that's a lot of grams. 50 grams is under 2 ounces. That's not a lot of weight there. So when you hear 50 to 75, don't think it's this enormous amount of weight. It's not. It's a very small amount of weight, okay? We're in the metric system, folks. Big numbers doesn't mean huge differences. So anyway, I came across this cymbal that's 2,300 grams. Man, it has virtually rocketed to the top of my go-to cymbals as far as like for straight ahead and acoustic jazz cymbals. It is pure magic. There's not a strident overtone in it. It sounds like one of the best old Ks that you will ever find at a mere a third of the cost of what a lot of those go for, I should say. It's just classic dark sound. It feels great because it's a Turkish made cymbal, right? So it's the 80/20 bronze. It feels really malleable under the stick. It's very responsive. If this makes sense when I say this, it's got a bit of a tight articulation, which it means it's got a spread underneath, right? But it doesn't just get bigger and bigger when you lay into it. It's got that tight kind of a controlled stick definition, and the bell is super integrated into it, which, you know, everybody who's heard the show has heard me talk about the bane of any ride cymbal for me. I hate really separated, super high-pitched pingy bells. I can't stand it, even on rock cymbals. I like a bell that's a little more integrated into the cymbal, right? If you can find one of these cymbals that's in that gram weighting, which there's quite a few of them that are in there, I think if you've been looking for a good replication of an old K, man, you're going to be hard-pressed to go wrong with one of those. So it's the Istanbul Agop 30th anniversary cymbal. Been around for a few years even, right?
Yeah,
like 4 or 5 years, something maybe.
Maybe longer than that.
Yeah. And like I said, I've been hearing them off and on, but it's just one of those things that you have that moment of clarity, and then you play one in person or play several of them in person. It's like, this is the real deal, folks. So that's my pick.
Awesome. Per our show, you know, overthinking, you know, this, that, and the other. It was you who kind of brought me back to reality regarding some hi-hats, if we're going to talk about cymbals.
Yeah.
You know, you and I both have been on the mad search for the last 3 or 4 years of trying these different hi-hats and this and that, and you fall in and out of favor. And I have these magic set of 14-inch new beats. They're not old, they're not new, they're not the redesign, they're not 60s or mid 2000s maybe. Something about them is just crazy. And the other night we were doing one of the tribute shows. It was a James Brown show, and we're standing there next to John Roberts or somebody playing, and which kind of in of itself is going to make things sound great. But you're like, what are those hi-hats?
Yeah.
And I'm like, oh, those are my new beats. And it kind of just clicked to me, and I use them way more than I want to admit. They just sound amazing, and they cover a lot of ground. And I'm kind of like, I have that in this ride cymbal that I sort of like, no matter what, I'm always going to have those. Yeah. Crashes go in and out, you crack things, this about blah, 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 blah. But these hi-hats are incredible. And I just poo-poo them every few months. Like, I need to find this. Oh, I need that, blah, blah, blah. And they're just like, I've done every gig known to man on them, and they work. So get out of our own way. You know, if you find another pair that's great and they work for something else, cool. But you always got that all-purpose ground covering set of hi-hats. There they are.
And to tell you what really kind of crystallized those hats in particular for me was, you know, most of the night you and I were standing 5 feet from the drums, right? We were standing right to the side there. And so we were getting the actual acoustic sound of those. Fantastic. Mm-hmm. Well, I walked to the back of the room a few times also. and heard them coming through the PA, and they sounded equally fantastic. And, that's not the case. That's not always the case.
No, definitely not. More often than not,
right.
It doesn't translate.
And so I was like, John, what are these hats, man? And they were fantastic. So don't sell those.
No, I won't.
Like you did that other Magic set of 15-inch Ks that you complained about the sticks getting eaten up.
They weren't that magic.
They were great.
Yours
man.
are better than mine.
They might be, but yours were really good, man.
Yeah, but I didn't connect with them, and there's something to be said for that.
Yeah.
If you don't connect with them, no matter how
That's
cool,
true.
Or even if it's in your opinion, they're amazing. Maybe they're not for me, and I'm playing them more, and I'm not feeling it. That's not right or wrong.
Yeah.
You played them for 10 minutes and loved them.
Yeah.
I played them for 30 gigs, and eventually it was just like they're nice, but they're not. I played those new beats for 1,200 gigs.
Right. Yeah.
So, perception, hands-on, all that. And at the same time, man, what you like and what I like can be a little different, and that's okay too.
No, it's not.
Yes, it is. I'm not budging.
I'm not. I didn't bring you over here to be sensible, John.
Well, I know, but I mean, every once in a while I make a mistake and fall into that and shock you.
Folks, thanks for hanging in there with us. We appreciate your patience. We are back with a vengeance. We hope you enjoyed this show. I'm not going to go through the full diatribe of all the other stuff that we normally put at the end of the previous shows. Mm-hmm. I'm just going to say, everybody, go over to drummersweeklygroovecast.com.
There you go.
Everything's there. All of our social media, all of our episodes. You can get in touch with us there, which almost everybody that did email us going, what are you guys doing? They did email us through there, although we did get a few Facebox replies as well. Mm-hmm. But head on over to drummersweeklygroovecast.com. All the new shows will be there. Anything else you want to say, buddy, before we tap out?
My nugget of wisdom is when you're swimming in the confusion of cymbal buying.
Oh, okay.
A good set of new beats are like a coded ambassador or a superphonic.
Mm-hmm.
Just have a pair.
Mm-hmm.
So when you think something's sexier and you get wrapped up in it and then you kind of fall out of favor, you always got your boys. Hard to go wrong with having that as that little backup plan.
This could almost be another complete and total separate show. But there's something about that, the exact combination that you were talking about there, those particular instruments.
The litmus tests.
How much of that has to do with ever since we've been listening to recorded music, probably 90% of the time when we're hearing whatever's being played on the radio or on a disc, it's that combination of instruments.
A superphonic,
right?
With a coded ambassador. That's a good point.
So there's some subliminal training that we've had out of that as well.
Well, or they've proven to be, pretty dang good.
Right. All right, folks, that's going to do it for this week. We will see you soon. Thanks again for staying with us.
Bye-bye.
Bye-bye.